and I'm going to post it tonight and then put the video up tomorrow. So I really appreciate you doing a short notice makeup.
Yeah, no worries.
Maybe we'll have our thoughts in slightly better order now that we've been through it once.
Yeah, I was wondering, will it be better or worse? Will it be more organic or will it be more rehearsed?
I don't know. Probably worse. It's probably just good to bank on worse.
Yeah, I feel like it's always better to bank on worse.
Yeah. Hello, and welcome to a makeup edition of Heavy Hands, by which I do not mean that we will be spending today's episode discussing cosmetics, but rather that, well, you probably noticed if you listen to the show, it's a little late, and if you are not up to speed with what was played out on Twitter, we recorded this episode already on Tuesday this week, and it was lost. This guy right here, your beloved host, failed to save the episode, and then the power went out, and the file was not recoverable. So Phil McKenzie, my co-host, has been just so kind and so patient and so willing to come back and try to rehash the whole thing. Phil, feeling good about this? About already having struggled to break this fight down once and now getting to do it again?
Yeah, I figure we should just pretend to be surprised by each other's picks. Pretend to find each other's jokes funny, even though, we already do that.
Yeah, that's
yeah, we're just going to basically attempt to robotically recreate everything we discussed last time without a moment's deviation.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. Okay, let's get into it. Well, in today's episode, we are breaking down what's happening next week, what happened last week, the usual. I think at this point we can probably afford to even more just sort of front load the show with the one fight that everyone really wants to hear us break down, Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya for the unified UFC middleweight title, an extremely tantalizing fight, a striker's delight, if you will. And in the co-main event, Ally Quinta versus Dan Hooker, we're going to be talking about that as well. And there is literally nothing else on this card that is really worthy of any deeper discussion. So forget the rest of UFC 234. After that, we are going to take a quick look back at UFC Copenhagen. And yeah, without any further ado, let's jump back in to Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya. Maybe we can structure the discussion a little better this time, Phil. What I always like to think about with matchups, as listeners will have probably noticed, is directionality. It's often the sort of key factor in fights. I think in this fight, who controls the center, who keeps the initiative and pushes their opponent back is very likely to be the eventual winner. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think both of these men do their best work coming forward. I think neither one of them is a dedicated counterpuncher, although both of them can counterpunch.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I think both of them like to set a pace and an approach for themselves on the offense. I think Adesanya of the two is the more likely to read his opponent and to give them space.
Mm-hmm. And
I think Whittaker is probably the one who tries to dictate more right from the beginning of the fight. But yeah, in general, I think whoever controls the center is the most likely to be having success.
Which the tricky thing with this matchup, still, even having now discussed it in depth twice on two different shows, the tricky thing I think is trying to figure out what happens after. I think we have a fairly clear picture of what we expect to happen in round one, right? As you just said, Robert Whittaker is the more immediately assertive fighter. He tends to start a lot faster, and Adesanya, as you said, likes to get a read on his opponent and sort of just let the first round elapse, give them an opportunity to show him what they do, give him a chance to get into a rhythm and get comfortable. The counterpunching thing is interesting, right? I've looked into this more actually since our first discussion, because I agree with that point. Neither of these guys is really at their best as a counter fighter. That they both can do it. The thing to really think about here is when are these guys vulnerable to being countered, and how does the opponent's style sort of fit into that? You know, how well equipped is the other guy to take advantage of those very momentary vulnerabilities? Because these are two fighters who they keep their eyes on their opponent. They try to stay in good position as often as possible. They they think defensively. So you have to seize those moments when they appear, or neither of these guys is going to allow you time to sort of think about the counter that you want to throw. Something we talked about in our first breakdown was the sort of Whittaker style, the karate boxer, the 185-pound Kyoji Horiguchi, if you will. What we saw in Kyoji Horiguchi's last fight was one of the points at which that style can be broken down. The vulnerability of a fighter like Whittaker, who likes to fight from a relatively long distance and explode into space with those karate-style blitzes, is when he's blitzing. Is Israel Adesanya the kind of fighter who is going to hit Robert Whittaker as he's closing the gap?
And I think we agreed that he's probably not. He's probably not a same-time counterpuncher as, for example, Wonderboy Thompson was, who ended up beating Whittaker back at welterweight. And also, I think we've seen that he has in fact, over his time in the UFC, been somewhat troubled by blitzers, people who cover space quickly.
Adesanya, I think.
Yeah. I think specifically both Kelvin Gastelum and Anderson Silva were able to kind of come after him with series of punches and kind of push him out of position. I think Gastelum showed a much more developed jab than he had previously. It allowed him something to come in behind rather than just sort of leaping across space with his left. I think, and he showed much better he showed much better head movement on the way in. I think both of those two things gave Adesanya a bit of pause throughout the matchup, and even got him hurt in the first round. And I think Silva showed that he could just back off Adesanya on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's someone who's necessarily comfortable. You know, he says himself that he's a sniper, and as such, I don't think he's comfortable kind of creating direct collisions. He wants you to swing and miss and then be out of position, and that's when he fires. He's not a same time counter guy.
In both of those fights, he hurt his opponent with a counter, but it was not as they were crashing into space. In fact, those were the moments in those fights where Adesanya looked the worst. You know, he got his feet out of position. He's so reactive on defense, but not as well schooled as Whittaker with his defensive reactions, that like he's what I'm saying is he's gonna react to that blitz. He's going to make moves to protect his chin, but those moves are not fundamentally sound all the time. They're not going to put him into a position where he can then make another move and another move and another move. So like the mechanics for Adesanya just really aren't there for the same time counters. And like you said, with Gastelum, it was after he overswung on a big left hand and lost his balance that Adesanya cracked him with a counter right. Likewise, when Anderson Silva was charging after him, he went for a clinch knee as Silva was about to crash into him, and then it was a quick right hand off of that after the blitz had already ended. And that is like, that's the Israel Adesanya thing. Sniper is the word for it, is he wants to see the opening present itself after making sure that he's in a safe position, or on the other hand, after making sure he's in the right position to really capitalize effectively with a straight, clean, accurate, efficient shot.
I think that there is one exception here, and that's the knee that he got Derek Brunson with. So it's not like he's never going to do that kind of thing. But that was, I think, a rather large opening, let's say, for Friday. It's not something that he traditionally likes to go for, I think.
There ain't no blitz like a Derek Brunson blitz. If you're going to time somebody on the way in, Brunson's your guy. Although not anymore. Yeah, something I looked at after our first discussion, though, was Whittaker's own counterpunching. Because if Adesanya does get the chance to back Whittaker up and control the center, and we'll talk about what his avenue towards that probably is, how does Whittaker deal with that? And it stood out to me, actually, that Whittaker is much more of a same-time trigger sort of counterpuncher than Adesanya. I don't think he's as good of a counterpuncher. He's rarely hitting these perfect shots at exactly the right moment off the counter. It's a lot, wilder and a lot less organic, shall we say. It's a lot more just like, oh, this is the counter combination I throw when someone's pushing me. It's the right uppercut and the big whipping left hook. But he's actually a lot more astute at interrupting people as they are coming into him. Sometimes with the stomp kicks and the side kicks to the body, with the body jab and the jab upstairs, the left uppercut, the right uppercut. These are all good weapons that Whittaker will use as the opponent is crashing in. So I think that feels like a key factor to me. I went back and watched Adesanya's one KO loss in his kickboxing career to Alex Pereira, who is still knocking fools out now in 2 divisions. I think he just became a 2-division champ in Glory. And, it was an Adesanya fight. He largely had the better of it. He was controlling the pace, landing better shots at his preferred range. Then he got knocked out cold with a left hook mid-exchange.
Yeah, it's not an un-Whittaker punch, is it?
No, exactly. And I think that for all that Whittaker is momentarily vulnerable when he's doing that lunge, when he's blitzing across space, Adesanya, I think, is like his offense really is his defense a lot of the time. He's comes in very tall, doesn't really bother with a high guard most of the time. He trusts in his eyes, but positionally, he's there to be hit if you're willing to throw when he's throwing. Likewise, he's much more counterable after he's thrown. He's a lot more likely to just sort of stand there and watch his work because I think he's looking for the next offensive opportunity. He's looking for the next opening to present itself. He's still trying to snipe. So yeah, that kind of stood out to me. Whittaker, a wild left hook counter mid-exchange. I can see Whittaker throwing that with regularity. And I have to wonder how much more difficult that makes it for Adesanya to keep the pressure on as the fight continues.
Yeah, I thought that maybe, one of the things that fuels Adesanya's skill in MMA is that his ability to kind of transition from one sport to the other is that he is a very handsy fighter. Mm-hmm. He's very much someone who likes to parry and redirect and just move his head out of the way a little bit. Mm-hmm. And you can see why that kind of approach might lend itself a little bit more to being able to get out of the way of jabs and straight punches, and it might leave him a little more open to just hooks. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so the other thing we mentioned as kind of an inherent weakness of the karate boxer style is that, yeah, firstly, there's that moment where they have to explode into space and they have to accept some form of vulnerability. It's simply not avoidable.
It's always a leap of faith.
And the second is kicks. And that is something that Whittaker has struggled with. Yeah.
Throughout his career. We got the Rafael Natal fight. We had some difficulties with kicks in the Uriah Hall fight. We obviously had some severe difficulties with the kicks of Yoel Romero when he was throwing them. I think the worrying thing about Whittaker with kicks is not so much that he's just there to be hit by them. It's that he doesn't really deal with them super aggressively the way he does with a lot of other threats. That's the most concerning thing, and that's what I was sort of alluding to before, is that if Adesanya makes it out of the first round, which if someone's getting an early finish in this fight, it's very likely Robert Whittaker, but I think both of us are expecting Adesanya to survive the first round. Both these guys are, by the way, like it bears saying, insanely tough, in addition to being great technicians and great athletes and great fighters. But if Adesanya can survive that first round, like how much of an effect do you think Adesanya's quick, diverse kicking game is going to have on Whittaker's ability to maintain a pressuring style? The pressuring style that we both kind of think he's probably best served to play.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really troubling one because, as we mentioned, Whittaker has had close, ugly fights with powerful kickers.
Mm-hmm.
Natal, Hall, etc. And he's also shown, a vulnerability to getting injured in fights.
True. His body is just collapsing.
Yeah, his chin has held up incredibly well at middleweight, but his tendency to pick up attritional damage has not necessarily been the same. He was on one leg for most of that first Yoel Romero fight.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think there's a distinct problem. There's a distinct chance that Adesanya can just kind of pick up attritional damage as the fight goes on. I think he's not as we've mentioned, he's not a classical kickboxer. So he's not someone who really, leg kicks people to death like a Dutch style guy would.
He's a body kick, head kick kind of guy. There are very few low kicks in the Adesanya arsenal.
Yeah, so I think that's at least something of a boon for Whittaker, because it means that he's not going to have to choose to come in and exchange the whole time or get his front leg kicked off.
That's true. I'm worried about that left body kick of Adesanya's, though. That's a weapon that has also worked quite well against Whittaker. I think probably has something to do with the fact that he leans on that boxing style defense. He's very likely to dip down to his right, slip to that side in response to a lot of attacks, and just eat a hard left kick to the body, even blocked. Like, those are very damaging, impactful shots. And yeah, but the bigger thing is whether or not he's forced into that situation. Like, that might actually be better, is my question. Because if the kicks get Whittaker, if they allow him the space to sort of step back and think about what's happening, that takes the pressure off Adesanya. And Whittaker picking up attritional damage over the course of a fight, he has been saved by the fact that the guys he's fighting don't just get measurably stronger with each passing round. They're not the same kind of building fighters that Adesanya is, where once he sees the 1-2 working in one round, it's going to be the 1-2 in the clinch knee after that. And once he sees the clinch knee working and notes your reaction to that, it's going to be the feinted clinch knee and then the right straight. He's a very organically flow charty kind of fighter once he gets his offense rolling. So that's my main concern with the kicks, is that Whittaker is defensively sound enough to, I think, stop to not just get picked apart by them every time Adesanya throws, but in doing so, he's going to have to take his foot off the gas.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, so are we confident in Adesanya's kick defense?
Not really, actually. It's a good question. Because how many great kickers has Adesanya dealt with in the UFC? This is troubling. Zane and I argued about this in the vivisection. Boy, I maybe we should go to recording Heavy Hands after the Vivi every week, so I can just trash Zane for his terrible analysis.
That little bitch.
Even though I'm pretty sure his recent record is way better than mine. Yeah. Well. Oh God, what were we saying? The blah blah. The kick defense.
Zane. He sucks.
Zane sucks. Yeah, the trouble with this fight is thinking of it in terms of resume. Both of these guys have kind of similar lineups, and really, without the Romero fights, Whittaker's resume at middleweight feels a little shallow. But Adesanya's is it's a good schedule. He was very well tested. It's just he passed each test the first time he faced it. There's not a lot of variety there, is what I'm saying, on Adesanya's resume as an MMA fighter. So yeah, it's kind of a question how well he deals with kicks. Certainly, his tendency to get out of position and just sort of make snap decisions about how to move his head in response to each threat as he sees it. That does sound like a recipe for a Robert Whittaker head kick. I think that has to be said, that one of Whittaker's best weapons is the head kick, which he sets up with the jab and then the feint, all of these little preliminary moves to get you out of position, to get you leaning towards that shot. And he's a great kicker as well. He's certainly the best kicker that Israel Adesanya has faced in MMA. And I don't know. Adesanya dealt with kickers largely with straight counter punches back in his kickboxing days. Like, he was just the better boxer in a lot of those matchups. But here, I don't think he has that sort of easy comfort that he can just fire a straight shot down the middle every time a kick is coming at him. It's also the fact that Whittaker's not a typical kickboxing style kicker either. He's throwing side kicks and front kicks and very snappy, quick high kicks. There's a lot of variety and dexterity there. So I don't really know. Do you have a read on how well Adesanya deals with kicks in general?
Not particularly. I will say that just his somewhat more squared up stance is probably better against those stomp kicks than a more front foot heavy one might be. Because I think that his upright stance is kind of is built to be pretty decent against them.
Sure. Doesn't make him any less vulnerable to the front kicks and the side kicks to the body that Whittaker also likes to throw. Yeah,
and the general, disguising the head kick behind the right hand kind of thing, which, as you mentioned, I think is a significant vulnerability. I think
think of that gas.
Just in general, I think Dan Tom at MMA Junkie, who's I enjoy reading, he mentioned that he thinks Adesanya's defense is specifically weaker in the southpaw stance.
I agree. So I agree with that.
It will be interesting to see if he has to throw if he wants to go for the open stance body kick, it does seem like that is actually the point at which he really opens himself up to being blitzed.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That was Pereira knocked him out when he was in southpaw. He got hurt by the shots from Silva largely when he was in southpaw. I agree. I don't think Adesanya is like a great defensive fighter to begin with. He's got good distance management, good footwork, and great eyes. But the usual sort of axiom about your defense being worse in your unnatural stance, it definitely holds true. He's even more vulnerable there. God, what else is there to say about this fight? There's so much to cover still.
I believe, is Robert Whittaker going to wrestle Israel Adesanya? And we had a fairly long discussion about this, but basically our conclusions were we haven't seen any reason to assume why he will.
Yes. When has Robert Whittaker ever shot for a takedown?
And this is an MMA fight, and MMA fights get weird.
Yeah.
Even when there's it's nominally two strikers in there. Sometimes it hits the mat just by accident, as sort of happened in Gastelum Adesanya and Whittaker Hall, for example. Like wheel kicks, weird shit happens, and it hits the mat. That is where I think Whittaker's wrestling and grappling pedigree is more likely to show itself. Adesanya is a very, how do I put this? He has a great sense of priority on the ground. He knows exactly what he should be going for. He has what Firas Zahabi would call a 60-second guard. He's going to either try and submit you, or he's going to fight hands and get back to his feet very, very quickly. But if it does hit the mat, and it's there for more than 10, 20 seconds, it should be assumed that Whittaker is going to fuck him up.
Yeah, I think Adesanya I mean, shit, his ground game, his defensive wrestling, all of that's been incredibly impressive and how quickly it's developed. But the way you develop, at least the appearance of a solid skill set so quickly is by learning it narrowly. You like you said, you have to have your priorities in order. And the thing about Adesanya is he knows when he's on his back, he's got to be super aggressive. He knows when he's anywhere near the fence, he's got to work towards it immediately. He knows he's got to create angles when somebody's working in on a takedown and get himself to open space. His priorities are all correct. It's still almost certain that in a scrambling situation, he is going to be in his rush to do the strategically correct things and get back to his feet. That Whittaker's wrestling and scrambling ability could actually pose a real threat to him there. What we saw in the Uriah Hall fight from Whittaker was a really astute ability to float over a scrambling opponent and maintain top position. So a Robert Whittaker back take, I don't think, is out of the realm of imagination. I can see it happening. But there are people who keep asking, like, is Whittaker going to take Adesanya down? And I just don't think that's likely. Like, even if he does, I don't know that it would be a good idea. Because I don't know if it's his offensive wrestling in a protracted battle against the fence is better than Adesanya's defensive wrestling. And if it is it worth expending that energy against a fighter as efficient as Adesanya, someone who, unlike a Yoel Romero, is just going to be getting better and more comfortable over the entirety of the fight? Yeah, so I wouldn't bank on that if you're liking Robert Whittaker. But I don't know. If I have to pick this, like I'm still very wishy-washy, even though I talked about it twice in depth. I think Whittaker's early start, that's a good sign. I think his greater willingness to exchange punches is a good sign for him. There have been certainly worse strikers than Robert Whittaker, like Marvin Vettori, who had success just by picking up the pace and throwing more and sort of making an agreement with themselves that every time Adesanya tries to hit me, I'm going to throw 3 punches right at his face. I think that is in Whittaker's favor, that he is willing to do that. He's more comfortable in messier exchanges. And I think Whittaker's defense, like, if Adesanya is not super likely to catch Whittaker on the way in, then the fact that Whittaker is, of the two, clearly the better defensive fighter is big. He's really responsible after he throws. He's going to take an angle, his feet are going to be moving, his head is going to be moving either offline or under the shot, or he's going to be blocking. He's very aware of where he's vulnerable once he's committed himself to that blitz into range. And I don't know, like, it's really Adesanya's kicks that have me the most nervous for Whittaker's sake, because otherwise it does feel like Whittaker has the tools to keep that pressure on Adesanya and prevent him from landing the shots he's going to need to land to get the space and the respect back and start to take over. Yeah.
I tend to agree pretty much across the board. I am also, like, feeling very wishy-washy. I know some people are fairly confident in who they think is going to win, and I am definitely not. But yeah, like you said, I think the fact that Adesanya is going to have to fight his way out of a hole, the fact that I think that he probably has a decent chance of actually getting hurt during that slow first round.
Yeah.
And the fact that Whittaker keeps a tremendous pace.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Whittaker slowed against Yoel Romero, but that was against,
Yoel Romero.
An incredibly physically overwhelming Yoel Romero.
Yeah.
Who hurt him extremely badly.
The energy expended in the third round alone would have exhausted the vast majority of the middleweight roster.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Whittaker's slight edge in volume and his better defense in a vacuum leads me to favor him. over Adesanya's probably slightly superior counterpunching and his ability to rack up attritional damage with kicks. And yeah, I mean, it just should be an amazing fight. It's one of the best ones we've seen booked this year. It's two of the best lead hand jabbers and lead hand fighters that we've seen fight each other in recent memory. Both with extremely different kind of styles of doing that. And it's going to be great.
I just want to see a battle of jabs, folks. That's all I really want. I want to see two guys do a jab over and over and over.
I just want to see it last at least 3 rounds.
Yes. Yeah, you were saying this after we recorded the last episode, how sort of heartbroken you will be, even though emotionally you'll be on Whittaker's side. You'll be heartbroken if he does successfully finish Adesanya early.
Yeah, I just don't want to see it. I want to see something cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, most people think quick finishes are cool, but
most people suck.
This is why we don't have friends. So, a fight so nice, we had to record a discussion of it twice. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to get into the co-main event, Ally Quinta, Dan Hooker, a genuinely quite good and interesting matchup, and the only other one of its kind to be found on the UFC 234 undercard. After that, a couple of quick words. We'll probably run through it quicker than we did for the first episode on Jared Cannonier versus Jack Hermanson and the other results of UFC Copenhagen. All of that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Okay, folks, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's talk about Dan Hooker, Ally Quinta. Phil, I'm going to let you take the lead.
So this is a fight where, as you mentioned last time, it is not dissimilar to being Ally Quinta fighting against the same style matchup again, albeit a slightly worse one. Namely, he's fighting a slightly worse Donald Cerrone.
Donald, I really am already regretting having repeating this because I said it on the Vivisection and I felt a great wash of shame afterwards, but it's Ally Quinta versus Donald Cerrone.
Oh man, you could have kept that one on the Vivisection.
Boy. That's one for Zane Simon.
Yeah, that's the
you didn't
place
for
that. Jokes like that, Connor.
You didn't deserve that. I'm sorry, Phil. Please, go on.
Okay, so this is, I mean, even that is perhaps slightly unfair to Dan Hooker, who is his own man, but and has his own kind of unique strengths and weaknesses. But he's similar to Cowboy Cerrone in that he is a tall man fighter who has developed to be a tall man fighter.
Yeah.
He is someone whose best work comes when people are closing distance on him, when they're changing levels on him. He has basically long punches and kicks to attack people at mid-range, and then a collection of tricky, evil finishing techniques like step knees, uppercuts, and snap-downs and headlock series for when they choose to come in, like by dipping their head, for example. Mm-hmm. And he's very, very good at that. I think he's won 1 decision in his entire career, and he's won 0 decisions in the UFC and has as far as wins go, 100% finish rate.
Which is insane.
Yes, that is ridiculous, especially when you consider he's been fighting at featherweight and lightweight, which are very, very good divisions. So Ally Quinta has recently been somewhat exposed as a bit of a plodder. I think we both thought that he was going to be able to, close the distance and fight aggressively at Cowboy Cerrone, and we realized that he really is not someone. He really is closer to being a Jim Miller type guy who is reasonably skilled in his own mid-range fight, but or even very skilled in his own mid-range fight, but outside of that range is shockingly vulnerable.
Like Jim Miller, a fighter who would often be better served to pressure and who doesn't really do it unless he's like fully invited. Because that was the big thing against Cerrone. It was the plotting nature has something to do with it, but it was the fact that Iaquinta didn't even get to the right range. He spent that entire fight in Donald Cerrone's ideal range, with a couple of exceptions here and there. And I don't think it was just like the foot speed was something, but it wasn't just a factor of foot speed. He also like just wasn't aware that he needed to close that gap, or he was so concerned about the counter knees and the clinch attacks of Donald Cerrone that he didn't want to risk it, which would also be a prescient concern in this matchup.
Yeah, it did look like he very quickly started just trying to time a single big shot that would turn the fight around for him, which is a notoriously terrible way to fight Donald Cerrone.
Yes.
I mean, particularly if you're just going to be a big right-handed bomber, someone that he's been fighting that style archetype since Jamie Varner back in the WEC days.
Bad example. It didn't always work out, right? Didn't Jamie Varner?
Yeah, but I mean, it's the fact that A, he learned how to beat it in their third fight, and B, that he's just fought against that a lot.
Yeah, that was 300 years and 9,000 fights ago for Donald Cerrone. So,
so I think in general, I have to favor Dan Hooker for that. I think he's the one that's definitely shown more growth in his recent fights. He's become more comfortable on the front foot. He's just become a better boxer in general. More willing to put combinations together. I think, just the ability to put multiple straight punches together is probably going to work reasonably well against Iaquinta.
Yeah. Iaquinta's... Oh, go on.
And, yeah, the fact that Iaquinta, a lot of his best work does come from level changes and dipping shots.
Yeah.
Probably means that Hooker's tricks will have their chance to work as well.
Yeah, that they will either catch Iaquinta clean and hurt him or something, or that they will dissuade Iaquinta from fighting the right kind of fight, and he'll end up fighting a long fight with Dan Hooker. And like Donald Cerrone, I don't think Hooker is really as good a long fighter as he is a tall fighter. But he's getting better. As you said, the straight punches, the jabs are a lot more consistent. I'm rewatching right now his fight with Ross Pearson, and it took a better look than I thought. He has, he's a slow starter, Dan Hooker. Has a little bit of trouble getting the timing on Pearson's jab counters early, but pretty quickly settles in and is using that jab really nicely as a sort of fencing defensive tool to keep Pearson at bay. And yeah, I just want to sort of reemphasize what you said there, that like Iaquinta is mechanically vulnerable to, like, it's not just that he's the shorter fighter, he fights like a shorter fighter. Most of his defense is, as you said, level changes, dipping or ducking or bobbing under punches. Even more than that, just in his neutral stance position, he is a front foot heavy fighter. He tends to lean forward and keep a lot of weight forward. He has historically been very susceptible to jabs and all types of quick, efficient shots which come down the center because the way he stands, his head is just too close to his opponent to get it out of the way unless he knows it's coming. And honestly, like, even though Ross Pearson is better off the back foot than he is going forward, I think he's a little better going forward than Iaquinta, just in terms of sheer technique. Iaquinta may be the harder hitter. He's certainly more durable. He may have some of these edges, but he doesn't have the variety of ways to get around a jab. And even despite that, it only took Hooker a round and a half to figure out how to time that head movement of Ross Pearson and end him. So I think it's a good matchup for Hooker.
Yeah, another fight which was, in retrospect, again, surprisingly a surprisingly clean performance from Hooker, especially considering how good he's looked lately. Gilbert Burns.
Yeah.
Because the way Hooker fought that fight was that it was basically 3 techniques, and he didn't overcommit on any of them. Everything was just there to connect, but without putting him out of position. He just went jab, right hand to the body, and leg kick. And he just kept his distance, and whenever Burns came forward, he had a jab, a right hand to the body, or a leg kick. And Hooker didn't exchange until Burns was hurt, and he polished him off fairly, convincingly and without a whole lot of pushback. Because he'd just thrown the right hand to the body every time, and Burns came rushing in, and then he just cracked him upstairs. That was pretty much the end of it.
He's tall, he's long, he stays over his feet. These are all the factors which will lead him to beating Al Iaquinta, I think.
Yep.
All right. Well, shall we take a trip back in time to a card that, boy, when we were first talking on Tuesday, Phil, this card was still in my brain. But now it's almost been a week, and this is the UFC schedule. So I don't even remember anything that happened. That's not true. Jared Cannonier and Jack Hermansson had a fight, though. And I think the gap will be good. I think we'll be able to abbreviate our discussion. We'll be a little less enthusiastic, which is probably for the best, because I think the first episode we recorded would have been like an hour and 35 minutes long. So let's break it down pretty quick. Jared Cannonier, Jack Hermansson. Our question leading into the fight was essentially, is Jack Hermansson's varied and intelligent game going to be enough to get it done against a fighter in Jared Cannonier who, while definitely getting technically better and benefiting from experience, is still mostly a factor in the middleweight division because of his physicality? How was that question answered?
Physicality wins.
Yay! It's exactly what we hoped. It's our favorite. Cheating.
Yeah. So, on the one hand, Cannonier has improved a lot. As we talked about later about other fighters on the card, a great way of leveraging athleticism is to leg kick people, because it forces them into an exchange, or it forces them to just get away from it, which leaves them kind of contending on foot speed. If you are there's a reason why Mark Giacchese has latched on to just kicking the other guy in the leg as his primary method of offense. And Jared Cannonier has gotten pretty good at that, and that's lent him the building block that he needed, I think. That either people come into exchange with him, or they lock up with him, or they get kicked in the legs. And that's allowing him to leverage a physical game against them, of which he has in spades. And conversely, I think we saw that Hermansson's game is a bit less functional than we gave it credit for.
Yeah, that his own game may have benefited, specifically in that Jacare fight, from Jacare's own waning physical abilities. But that Hermansson is a lesser athlete who is still trying to sort of paper over a lot of the weak points in his game with athleticism.
Yeah, I think it's Hermansson has a weird game. Is that he has it fits together reasonably well. You know, he basically plays off the jab and the low kick, and then he tries to go for the takedown. He moves to one of his cool ground and pound positions, and he tries to finish the fight or choke you as you stand up. And the problem there is that he's not hugely dynamic on the feet.
Yeah.
And this meant that, like, if he traded jabs or leg kicks with Cannonier, there literally wasn't a number that he could land that was worth trading with Cannonier. And he quickly kind of gave up there. And the problem is that then he had to move to the wrestling game, which firstly became predictable, and secondly isn't that great in the first place by the the very best standards in the division. He's not a tremendous takedown threat.
Yeah. That was really emphasized by this fight. Like, Hermansson, this is what I mean when I say he was, it was kind of revealed to me how much he's forcing his way through a lot of his wrestling positions with athletic ability, rather than clean technique, because Jared Cannonier was mostly able to shut everything down with, like, just the basic first level of takedown defense, underhooks and sprawls. And Cannonier, or Hermansson, like, got that suplex at one point and just threw himself onto his own head. Tried to, let me pull this fight up while we're talking, but he really just tried to, like, just physically throw Cannonier around, and it did look like a kid wrestling with their dad. Like, it was rough. Here, let me pull up the fight so I can look at it while we talk about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll be interested to see if, where these guys go. I think Cannonier probably, he's gone in some ways almost as far as he can in this division. The only people left for him to really fight are Yoel Romero or Kelvin Gastelum, with unless they really need someone for Muscle Man to fight.
Who's Muscle Man? Paulo Costa?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. The thing is like, Cannonier is clearly developed. We tried to emphasize that the first time we talked about this. I want to underscore it again. Like, he did do some good things in this fight. It wasn't just that he was bigger and stronger. It was clearly a massive help and has been to him throughout his UFC career. But he was a lot more attentive to countering the jab. Like, that's a big development for Jared Cannonier as a fighter. Consistent jabbers are the fighters that he's struggled the most with throughout his career. Whether it was Jan Blachowicz, or even in the Ion Kudalaba fight, he ate a lot of jabs in the early going there. So that was nice, that he was able to come back from those shots. The thing that we mentioned last week that was even more apparent here is, like Israel Adesanya, he has finally gotten his grappling priorities straight. He is no longer content to use a reasonably good defensive guard game that will result in him losing a decision. He now works his way to the fence and stands up quickly or tries to scramble free. And like that alone, as a great athlete, is a really good and important development for him. The question is, going forward, are like any of these technical developments big enough to matter against, like you said, the big boys of the division? Bohashinia, Yoel Romero, Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya, Kelvin Gastelum. And I don't know about that. Like, I still wouldn't be shocked if Kelvin Gastelum went in there with his own largely underdeveloped game and just kind of put some work on Jared Cannonier. Like, I think the openings are probably still there, but it's nice to see him developing and improving, and like I said, benefiting from his increasingly long list of experience in the UFC.
Yep.
How about Gilbert Burns and Gunnar Nelson? How good did this make? Well, me, I guess. You probably weren't as excited to see Gunnar Nelson's downfall, but boy, it was delicious to me. I loved it so much.
What are you talking about? Gunnar got robbed.
Oh yeah, oh, shit, I forgot.
Yeah.
It was just like the Rick Story fight all over again.
Yeah.
Equally dominant.
Yep.
Yeah. What came through in this fight to me more than anything was sort of how shallow a lot of the aspects of Gunnar Nelson's game are. Like I knew that already, but it was really emphasized by Gilbert Burns here. Like, Gunnar Nelson is a phenomenal grappler. He's got tremendously good balance as well. Like, these are some of the athletic characteristics of his style. I think that probably has something to do with the fact that he's so hard to hurt, even though he's tremendously easy to hit clean on the chin. He's a really well-balanced fighter. But, like, that comes through in the scrambles and stuff like that. Even in this fight, he's very difficult to sweep. He's very difficult to consistently end up on top of. Like, these are good things going for him. But in terms of the technical depth of his striking and his wrestling games, and how well those really are connected to the truly deep part of his game, which is the grappling, not great. You know, like if you can solve the timing of Gunnar Nelson, then what else is there to his game really on the feet?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. He did get somewhat exposed as just being... He just doesn't have many tools to use. And it's the fact that he seems so determined that each one of them can only be used, you know, a limited amount of times because you need to shock them and instantly finish them. In some ways, I can kind of respect this as right. It is a philosophical decision that he just wants to win with the perfect shot. He wants to literally be that meme of the samurai that cuts people down in one single strike.
Gunnar Nelson wants to hit you with a punch and then be like looking down really close to the camera while you slowly fall down in the background.
Yes, exactly.
He wants that so bad.
Yeah, but you know that kind of led into a bunch of situations, like the one where he kicked Gilbert Burns in the leg, who had been the one kicking him in the leg up until this point in the fight, and like Burns spun all the way around, and you're like, man, that must have been a hard leg kick. And Gunnar Nelson was just like, I didn't finish him instantly. I'm not doing that shit again. Waste of time.
Yeah, what's the point?
Don't know why I bothered.
No grasp of the sort of attritional aspects of striking. It also came through in the wrestling. Like, Gunnar Nelson can be a sneakily effective wrestler, but in this fight, I'm a little torn on this. I'm not 100% sure, but I think his clinch wrestling may have gotten worse here. If I recall correctly, Phil, on our first attempt at this episode, I said something along those lines, and you said, did it? Or something like that. I said, it used to be better, and you said, you weren't sure. And I'm not sure either, but man, it was really laid bare that as long as you can time the entry of Gunnar Nelson, as long as you don't let him bull you off your feet as he rushes into the double or to the body lock, and just sort of drives through you, then like the chain wrestling really isn't there. He looked genuinely quite clueless in a lot of the clinch exchanges. He did his best to slow Gilbert Burns down and hold him against the fence for long portions of round 3. And in all of that time, he was not progressing and didn't really seem to know how to progress the position. He just sort of held on to an underhook and sort of fiddled around with Gilbert's wrist. Every once in a while he thought about changing levels to grab his hips, but Gilbert just, one by one, responded to each threat, and Gunnar had no ability to use those reactions against him or to disguise any of his attempts or to chain any attacks together at all. So, like, that was not a good look, because Gunnar Nelson's wrestling game being solved is, like, that's a big problem. And the trouble for Gunnar Nelson is that you can pretty much solve his wrestling game as long as your baseline defensive wrestling skills are there. You can solve it as you solve his striking game, because they both rely on the same premise of timing. So,
yep.
Yeah. Good showing from Gilbert Burns, though. Very good showing.
Yeah. Yeah. He's really looking like he's thriving at welterweight. He's still physically strong. He's aggressive. It solves some of his problems with not being that quick or defensively sound, just because he is quicker than everyone else. You know, he's comparatively quicker up at this weight class and a bit more durable. Yeah, it was good. I think for Nelson's part, I don't want to see him fighting any more defensively vulnerable tall people. I don't want to see him fighting any more Brandon Thatchers. I don't want to see him fighting Yancy Medeiros or anything like that. I just want to see him fighting active muscle cubes now. Because he's fought Rick Story and Gilbert Burns and struggled with both of them. And he needs to prove that he's actually trying to win these fights. So I want him to fight Michel Prazeres.
You're cruel. This is supposed to be my line. I would like to see Gunnar Nelson knock out a big tall guy who doesn't know how to stop him. You know, he deserves that.
I enjoy watching Gunnar Nelson do his thing, but I've now seen it multiple times, and he's not like a prospect anymore.
Certainly not.
If he wants to be a contender, he should have to fight a cube of meat.
Gunnar Nelson versus the Flesh Cube 3. Yeah, I would be down for watching him fight Michel Prazeres, I guess. I think he would just be looking very sad the entire time. Like, that was the really troubling thing here, right? Is that Gunnar Nelson was showing emotion in the third round, and it wasn't a pleasant emotion. I don't know. I felt for him. I'm starting to wonder how much longer I can keep this up. You know, he's no Shevchenko. Let me just say that. He's much easier to like than a Shevchenko.
Wait until he shows you his... Actually, no, I was going to say wait until he shows you his dance routine, but his dance routines are actually pretty awesome.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, he's pretty good. Yeah, I like Gunnar Nelson. And I like Gilbert Burns. And I recall saying this at the end of the last week's discussion of this, but I believe in my heart that Gilbert Burns is the sole innocent member of Team Evil. And if you have evidence that he is in fact a bad person, don't show it to me. I don't want to know. I want to believe that there is one innocent, that there's like a father or like an uncle nephew relationship between Gilbert Burns and Rashad Evans, and that they all care about it. Redeems them too. You know what I mean? Like, Michael Johnson is a bad guy, but he keeps it under wraps when Gilbert's around to protect the young man's innocence. It's the only thing. He's the soul of that team, goddammit. So please don't tell me about his many, bench warrants for sexual misconduct and his vehicular manslaughter case and all of that. I don't want to know. Okay, one more break. When we come back, still a couple things to cover from UFC Copenhagen, and that's pretty much it. So we'll make it a short one after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's keep running through this card as quick as we can. There are two light heavyweight fights here, Phil. One of them I really, really want to talk about. Even though we have already had this discussion, I'm still excited to think about the okayification of the light heavyweight division and how easily it was waylaid and canceled, and that yet another old dinosaur has prevented a prospect from rising through the ranks. I'm talking, of course, about Ovince St. Preux versus Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. He actually got, I have to say he actually got Von Flue choked. Still, people are letting this happen, and I'll just repeat what I said on Twitter after the fight, but it was a simple OSP quote from his post-fight interview. He said, very astutely, the Von Flue is my signature, and for some reason everyone always gives it to me. And that's it. That's the analysis of OSP's career. What are your thoughts?
This was horrifying and hilarious all at once. I mean, Oleksiejczuk looked so good at the beginning.
Yeah,
he was punching OSP in the body a lot, and OSP was just like, "This has never happened in this division. What are you doing?" And he was mixing it up with strikes to the head, and then he doomed himself because he hurt OSP to the head.
Yeah,
and he then became, I think, it was that thing that he was one of these guys who was a consistent workhorse in his regional career. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, him racking up a short string of KOs in the UFC has made him think that he is something that he is perhaps not. Like a bigger and better athlete than he is, and a bigger knockout puncher because Oleksiejczuk sort of, once he hurt OSP to the head, he abandoned going to the body and just swung harder and harder for OSP's head. And to OSP's credit, he started landing counterpunches. He's always been sneaky good at that. We've mentioned on multiple occasions, like, his ability to throw that sneaky straight from either stance can catch people off guard.
There is, of course, the classic skateboard punch as well in his arsenal.
Yep. And OSP started being the one who started picking up the attritional body work, because OSP would just kick him in the body, back away, look defensively terrible, kick him in the body, and then Oleksiejczuk started to end up in the clinch more and more, and started just getting kind of big man.
Yeah, let me tell you, I'm really a big fan of the fact that Oleksiejczuk spent his entire pre-UFC career wearing people down and surviving attritional damage, or surviving immediate damage while racking up attrition over the course of the fight, and coming back after a bad first round to win. I love that has led him to this point where OSP, of all people, was able to do that to him, that he fell on an OSP-shaped sword. I don't know. I'll be honest, though. Like,
great.
I think it's probably a necessary thing for Oleksiejczuk, right? This is a prospect loss. I think it's perfectly fine to view it in that context. And like all prospect losses, it needed to happen sooner or later. If Oleksiejczuk had gone in there in the first round and knocked OSP out, as it seemed at several points he was about to, then like he wasn't going to do anything like better in his next fight. He would have still been waiting for the first light heavyweight who's simply been through enough misery and war that he doesn't break to come back and do that to him. So like, he's what, 25? 24. He's got a lot of time, especially in light heavyweight. He's got until he's 45, basically, to continue growing and improving. And I suspect he won't so willingly make that same mistake again, just given the kind of fighter he seems to be, and that his confidence just kind of got away from him. And I can understand, not just because he got quick knockouts in his last two fights, but also, like, how are you going to have OSP that badly hurt and that vulnerable to every single punch you're throwing and not go a little crazy trying to finish him, right? So it's fine. I understand.
He just needs to learn from it. He's like Nikita Krylov. He got von Flewed by OSP, and Krylov came back, and so can Oleksiejczuk. 4 years down the line, I think he can beat OSP.
Can I come back to the Von Flue joke real quick, though? Because, like, that's the really damning thing about this performance from Oleksiejczuk, is, like, that's OSP's move. And in a lot of ways, it's his only move on the ground. I want to give OSP some credit. Like, he has built up a game around the Von Flue choke, which is in itself a hilarious sentence to say. It doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Like, he threatens the Kimura on that side a lot. It's all about him getting that wrist control. If you're not going to guillotine him anyway, if you're not going to literally outright give him the Von Flue, then he's going to get wrist control, and he can switch between either threatening with the Kimura, or, as he did here to Oleksiejczuk, he's going to bring that arm behind his head and then quickly switch to the gable grip and trap your glove in his armpit. And he's obviously fantastic at finishing the choke. He knows exactly what position he wants to get to. He's got that sort of really unique drive on the shoulder that he gets, just piling his entire body weight on top of the submission. But boy, if you are a light heavyweight and your coaches have not even prepared you for what OSP might try to do once he starts grabbing your wrist on the ground and side control, like, what are you doing? Like there is no excuse for that. You know, like it's such an elaborate setup to get to that submission that like there are too many points at which you can break away and prevent the submission before you ever have to think about like actively defending it. You know, like even if you allow OSP to get so far that he's pulled your arm behind his head, you should at that moment be so ready for him to switch to the gable grip that you pop your hand free before he even comes close to getting his hands clasped together. So that was a tremendous failure of preparation on Oleksijczyk's part. That is the real reason that light heavyweight is so terrible, is that like with Alexei Oleinik at heavyweight, people just keep falling into the same exact trick over and over. They never learn from their predecessors. I don't know why that is. But other than that, it's all probably fine. Oleksijczyk's got lots of time. And like you said, Phil, sometime within the next decade, he'll rematch and he'll get that win back. Anything else from this card before we wrap up? Last week we talked... yeah?
Yeah, so we briefly wanted to mention Ion Cutelaba, the other light heavyweight who basically just destroyed Khalil Rountree. I mean, he's still just a crazy person.
Yeah.
And that worked well against Khalil Rountree.
He was a crazy person with direction because he used his wrestling and the ground and pound. That was like a serious hallmark of his pre-UFC career.
Yeah, I think Rountree, it increasingly looks like he might be kind of a bit of a light heavyweight Michael Johnson type, where if you really get him in bad trouble, he's not going to come back out of it. Cutelaba was in fact perfectly positioned to do that and just charged into him and just threw him off his feet. He's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, he's awesome. And I don't say that just because he kind of looks like me. Not in the face, I mean the physique. We're very similar.
Yeah.
Nicholas Dolby beat Alex Oliveira, which we did not see coming. The athleticism tables were slightly turned. What were the factors behind that?
I think Dalby looks bigger and stronger than he used to.
Definitely.
I think, probably the alcoholism not being a factor has helped.
He looked very strong.
Also, I think Oliveira's confidence is slightly broken. There was a point which we mentioned when we recorded this the first time, I think, when Dalby, there was an exchange between the two of them, and Oliveira tried to laugh it off, and to be like, "Oh, this is really fun. What a great time we're having," and it was just insanely unconvincing.
Yeah,
and I thought, "Oh, you're going to lose this fight."
There was a moment at the end of round 2 as well, like after some of those crazy exchanges, where Oliveira then tried to plaster the smile on at the end of the round and slap hands with Dalby, and Dalby ignored him and did not touch gloves, which is good. That is what fighters should do, especially when your opponent is like looking for a little mental reprieve, a little human connection to convince them that you are not in fact coming to break and smash them until they don't exist anymore. Like, you keep the pressure on between rounds. You don't make nice till the fight's over. And I say that knowing that Nicholas Dalby is a very nice guy.
Yep. And the other thing is that there was a really egregious stand-up in the third round.
Yeah, there was one in the second round too. It didn't have as much of an impact because it was short.
It wasn't nearly as bad, and it didn't have the same impact.
Well, it sucked. It was Nicholas Dalby got Oliveira down, and Oliveira up-kicked him in the face, and then the referee restarted them on the feet without even consulting Dalby. He took the position away from him because he had gotten fouled. It was just the fact that it only affected the final 30 seconds of the round, whereas Dalby had like a minute and a half to work after he got saved from Oliveira's top control in round 3.
Yeah, and he also mounted him and then completely fucked him up.
Yeah. So the officiating was really bad. It was the worst of the entire card. And this was the first fight I watched from this card, so I was very relieved as I went through the rest of it to find out that like that really was the only point at which the officiating was abysmally bad. But man, they brought out all of the timekeeping and the refereeing mistakes and the bowing to the booing pressure, the pressure of the booing crowd. All of that came out in that one fight. But
still, Nicholas Dolby, yay!
Hell yeah, Nicholas Dolby. Great performance. I love the way his style has developed to become more aggressive, a little more mid-ranged. His combination punching was a really big factor in this, that Oliveira just didn't get comfortable setting up any counters. Every time he covered up, Dolby just kept peppering and touching him. I think that had a lot to do with the sort of the withering confidence of Oliveira as the fight went on. Nicholas Dolby fought pretty perfectly, so I was very, very happy to see that. What else? There were two others that I recall us mentioning. Ismail Naurdiev had a very, very smart fight with Siar Bahadurzada. Likewise, Mark Jacasey fought a very intelligent fight against Lando Venata. Both of those guys just went in there, and both of them are like pretty athletic. Both of them have had some big sort of star-making performances already, and both of them fought perfectly disciplined. They made the right decisions. They stuck to the tools that they had prepared and which kept working throughout the whole fight. They didn't agree to mix it up with two opponents that would have really, really benefited from that. And it was great to see.
Yep. Yeah, both of these guys have had big wins and notably deflating losses.
Yes.
Really announced themselves as the coming men, and then had that all taken away from them. In Jacasey's case, particularly brutally by 3 consecutive losses.
They tried to Venata him.
Yeah. And so, this was a fight between... so both of these were fights between two athletes who were superb prospects, superb athletes against guys who also have extremely athletic games. And I think it was a lesson for them, I think, and it was good to see both of them fighting in this way, that they didn't fight like athletes. They fought like technicians. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was one of the interesting things, going back to Dolby versus Oliveira. He really has, we mentioned it before the bout. He really has now beaten, or at least drawn with, all the amazing athletes that he's fought. And he's lost to the reasonably physically underwhelming technicians. He's lost to the Zach Cummings, and he's beaten the Zaleski dos Santoses.
Yeah.
But anyway, these guys, Mark Jacasey and Naurdiev didn't fight like the athletes. Jacasey didn't do one crazy wacky thing. He kicked the legs, threw jabs, and hit takedowns.
It was like the thing that preoccupied his mind more than anything else over the course of the whole fight was just the range, just keeping the right distance and not allowing Venata to get close to him. And it was great.
Meanwhile, Bahadurzada and Venata have had extremely athleticism-dependent games, which has worked against them even more as their athleticism has eroded. Venata has realized he's actually not an amazing athlete by lightweight standards, and Bahadurzada just seems to be aging out a bit.
Yeah.
And this is leaving them, it's leaving them behind quicker because their games aren't that amazingly well constructed.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of unconvincing, confident body language, this never has Lando Venata looked less confident to me than he did throughout this fight. And the really worrying thing was over all this time, all these efforts to improve and develop his game, including the recent camp switch, which also doesn't seem to have had the desired effect. No one has been able to correct these tics that Venata has that have gotten him into trouble over and over again. No one has been able to stop him admiring his work after he throws a combination. No one has been able to stop him sort of posing and losing his respect for the distance between himself and his opponent. It's those things are really baked into his style. That is how Lando Venata learned to fight initially, was letting his opponent see this confidence. And it's just troubling that now that he's been so thoroughly exposed that he's still doing those moves, and they're not going to work. Now they just get him in trouble. No one's buying that you're not concerned with what they might throw at you, and that's why you've dropped your hands, when they've seen now like a dozen fights in which you get fucking smacked in the face with a jab every time you do it. And Chikadze seemed perfectly aware of that. Like, there was just nothing Venata could do to get in his head. Part of that had to do with Chikadze's discipline, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that there are no results and no improvements to back up the sort of inherent athletic confidence of Venata's style. So now it's just like a collection of vulnerabilities. And I don't know. It makes me sad. Like, it's the result I think we saw coming, seeing how Venata was being matched after his big announcing win or debut in the UFC, rather. But it does suck to see it play out exactly how you expected and just have him kind of wash out quickly after a series of exciting fights.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I'm really happy to see Chikadze performing like this.
Mm-hmm.
Even after the fight, they were asking him who he wants next, and he's just like, I just want to get better.
Yeah.
And, he's 26 years old. He's one of the very best athletes in the whole UFC.
Yep.
And he's clearly really got his head on straight.
He is turning into a little Leon Edwards.
Yep. And Naudiev, the guy is 22 years old.
Is he really?
Yes.
Holy shit. 1996. Yeah. Fuck you, Naudiev, you prick. Damn. Yeah, that was an amazingly disciplined performance for a 22-year-old.
Yeah. So, I mean, sky's the limit for these guys.
Huge potential for both of them. That's always good to see. Okay, well, that's our re-record of this week's Heavy Hands. Thank you all so much for listening. If you have not already seen it, go check out the Patreon. On there, for your $3 a month subscription, you will find a boxing commentary video of the very recent fight between Errol Spence and Sean Porter. It was a crazy back-and-forth war that lasted 12 very exciting rounds, and I did some, technically focused commentary for that. So go over there if you want to watch that. You can find all of our other bonus episodes. We did a heavy bag last week that's on there, answered some of your questions. So go find that stuff. Hang out with your friends. Give us more money. Thank you. Let's see. Before we wrap it up, you can find us on social media, folks. Find Phil on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson, myself at Boxing Bush with a BUSCH. You can find our various pieces of writing on bloodyelbow.com. Phil, do you have a preview coming out like now?
Yeah, so very shortly. I think myself and David Castillo will just be breaking down Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya, because I suspect people don't expect much traffic for this card, which is unfortunate because it has an amazing main event, but I think the rest of the card probably supports that analysis.
Deserves it, yeah.
I will say also to make sure everyone check out thefightsite.com, because that's got a lot of guys that we know, a lot of great analysts have been contributing to that lately. There are a lot of tiny young people who have clustered around our good friend Kyle MacLachlan, he's basically like the Fagin to their Oliver Twist and or Artful Dodger. Oh, shit. I'm sorry, Connor.
What?
I don't mean to make cultural references which you as an American don't understand.
You're such a prick.
He is like, oh, wait a minute. He's like the Zordon to their Power Rangers.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, dumbing it down for me. I needed that. Yeah, so I'm like embarrassed because I forgot to mention it on last week's episode, and it was you who mentioned it, and then I just told Kyle on Twitter. I was like, oh, we got to redo our fight site plug, and I still was about to completely forget to do it. So thank you. Thank you, Phil, for mentioning it. They have been doing lots of good writing, a lot of good pieces coming out. It's that whole like fight analyst crew, and yes, they've gathered around Kyle MacLachlan, like a bunch of little guppies around their mama grouper, swimming through the sea of fight analysis. And like Kyle MacLachlan, I'm going to repeat the recommendation I made last week. You don't want to argue with any of them on Twitter, so don't do it. Stay away. They're scary. But they're good analysts, and you should check out their shit. Okay, that's it for this week's Heavy Hands. Thank you all for your patience. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope very much that you will enjoy Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya, because we damn sure will. Until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. Okay, we did it. Yeah.
That Fagan Artful Dodger thing, that's a book by a guy called Charles Dickens.
You're such a fucking asshole.